There's a story about halfway through the Epstein birthday book, written in a child's handwriting, which seems to be titled Uncle F Makes Potty. And it's about a grown man who doesn't know how to use a potty, who defecates on the floor. This story, written by a child, is possibly the most tasteful story in the Epstein birthday book, which was released by the House Oversight Committee last week. I'm not sure if Uncle F was supposed to be Jeffrey Epstein. The handwriting isn't great, and it might be an E rather than an F. But if the story was about Epstein, it highlights how in this book, which was written by his friends and given to him as a birthday gift, almost every story referred to him doing something revolting. I should point out early on that this video is not really appropriate for younger viewers, as I'll be talking about politicians, business leaders, royals, and other ne'er-do-wells. Look, I've signed a number of birthday cards over the years, the kind that gets passed around at an office, and you don't always know the person it's for very well. I've usually written, "Happy birthday, hope you have a great day," or something like that. I might make a joke if I thought that the person would appreciate it. Jeffrey Epstein's birthday book is nothing like that. There were a few polite messages in there. There was a nice note from his mom, for example, but things go downhill very, very quickly. This wasn't exactly a birthday card either. It was 238 pages long for one thing and bound in leather. It appears to have been printed in 3 volumes, probably because of its length, and it was titled The First 50 Years. It was put together by Epstein's now jailed co-conspirator Ghislaine Maxwell in 2003 as a 50th birthday gift, and it contained messages from billionaires, politicians, Nobel Prize winners, childhood friends, former girlfriends, and a wide circle of Epstein's elite acquaintances. One contributor, the industrialist and Epstein art advisor Stuart Piver, is credited by news sources for writing a limerick about Epstein that sums up the overall tone of the book. It ends, "Though up to no good, whenever he could, has avoided the penitentiary." Among the contributors were people like Donald Trump, Bill Clinton, and the UK's recently sacked ambassador to the United States, Lord Mandelson. The book was created 3 years before Epstein's first abuse allegations became public, but many of its entries suggest that his behavior was an open secret and a source of entertainment for his friends. President Trump initially claimed that the Wall Street Journal made up the book when they wrote about it a few weeks ago, calling it non-existent and fake. He even launched a $20 billion defamation lawsuit against the newspaper, its publisher, and its owner, Rupert Murdoch, who also owns Fox News, a network that's been credited with the rise of President Trump and which is generally supportive of him. This book might never have surfaced if it wasn't for people like J.D. Vance asking, "Where is this letter?" on the Everything app, formerly known as Twitter. Even after the House Oversight Committee released a scan of the book this week, complete with Trump's sketch and signature, the White House, who are possibly taking PR advice from Prince Andrew, continues to claim that the book is a forgery and fake news, released to perpetuate the Democrat Epstein hoax. The book turns out to be much worse than many expected, not just for Trump, but for everyone associated with Epstein. While the birthday book has gotten the most press, it wasn't the only document released by the House Oversight Committee. There's a copy of Epstein's will, a copy of the 2007 non-prosecution agreement, and entries from his address book. On top of all of this, on Thursday, Bloomberg News published an article about the trove of 18,000 personal emails from and to Jeffrey Epstein that they got access to. Those emails contained sometimes chilling details about how Epstein lived and his partnership with Ghislaine Maxwell. The birthday book and other documents raise even more questions about Epstein's influence and how widely known his behavior was amongst his friends and associates. I've read the entire birthday book so that you don't have to, so let's go through what we've learned about Epstein and his associates who contributed to the book, and why this is not just political or a celebrity scandal, and how it actually matters. Before we dig into that, let me tell you about this week's video sponsor, Surfshark. Surfshark has been my VPN of choice for quite some time now. It's an easy-to-use and affordable VPN app for Windows, Mac, Android, iOS, and more. VPN stands for Virtual Private Network, and when you use one, all of your internet traffic goes through a secure encrypted tunnel, adding a layer of privacy protection, which is particularly important if you use public networks at coffee shops or airports. Surfshark improves your privacy, makes it harder to be tracked online, and can bypass internet censorship. Surfshark doesn't just protect your data, you'll also find that if you log into streaming services from different countries, different content is available. With Surfshark, no matter where in the world you are, you get to take the internet from home with you. Surfshark is fast, reliable, and they don't collect or track your data. The best part is that Surfshark doesn't just protect you, but your whole family too, as they allow unlimited devices to use the one account. There's no risk in trying Surfshark as they offer a 30-day money-back guarantee. Go to surfshark.com/Boyle to get 4 extra months of Surfshark VPN. Click the link in the description to sign up today. The birthday book opens with a prologue written by Ghislaine Maxwell in handwriting that's so difficult to decipher it could be mistaken for a doctor's prescription. There's a good chance that Epstein didn't understand a word of it, and after one page of that handwriting, most people would just give up. And that's quite possibly why the FBI had all of this evidence, and obviously much more, but claimed that they couldn't find anything incriminating. Bill Clinton's handwriting is possibly worse than Ghislaine's, and I can't help but wonder if Epstein spent so much time visiting university math departments not because he was interested in mathematics, but because he was trying to find a code breaker who could decipher his birthday book. Trump is alleged to have referred to Epstein as an enigma, which is quite fitting, as the Enigma machine was a cipher device used in World War II, and this book reads like it was designed as a challenge for Alan Turing. It's not clear to me if these people actually have such terrible handwriting, or if it's just a smart strategy they came up with when they're writing something either inappropriate or to someone inappropriate, where they just scribble on the page and the person who gets the message assumes that it said something nice, but there's nothing incriminating left that can be used as evidence. Trump's strategy was a bit different to Clinton's. His message is clearly typed, so fully legible, but then he follows the Roy Cohn strategy of just denying everything and calling it fake news. So far, that strategy seems to be somewhat working, but the scandal just won't go away.
Are you still talking about Jeffrey Epstein? This guy's been talked about for years.
The book is structured like a scrapbook and divided into themed sections: family, Brooklyn, girlfriends, children, friends, science, girl-friends, this time with a hyphen between the word girl and friends, then special assistants and business. After Ghislaine's almost undecipherable message, we get into the family section, which is not so bad, but still a little bit weird. It kicks off with Epstein's birth certificate and a few other mementos from his youth, like a Cub Scout graduation certificate, with some undecipherable writing underneath it. There's a strange photo of Epstein, which seems out of place in the family section, with what appear to be armed African soldiers. And Ghislaine has written underneath, "These were your bodyguards before you began trading with presidents and getting the army and Secret Service to greet you." Now, I'm not sure if that word is trading. Like I said, her handwriting is not easy to read. There are plenty of inappropriate photos even in the family section, and there's a photo of Epstein and Ghislaine together labeled "The First Date Something 1991. There's a nice letter from his mother that's several pages long where she writes about his youth and tells him that his father would be proud of him. She mentions that he was listed as Bachelor of the Month in Cosmopolitan magazine when he was 27 years old, and in a possibly tongue-in-cheek manner says, "Today you still hold that title," showing some awareness of his reputation with women. In the Brooklyn section, there are a bunch of newspaper cuttings, the first one being about a young Jeffrey Epstein playing the accordion at Carnegie Hall. I can't find much about this section online, but they don't seem like real newspaper articles. They're possibly written by his friends reminiscing about his youth. They've headlines like Hunchback Dies, Teen Bitten, and things like that. Some names appear to have been redacted even in these articles. One of the stranger ones, with the headline Yellow Laundry Mystery Solved, seems to be about a young boy being caught urinating on his neighbour's laundry while it's drying on a clothesline. And I don't know what to tell you about that. On page 57, there's an unsigned handwritten note from a Brooklyn friend who writes about how the author, along with Epstein, their friend Warren Eisenstein, and Epstein's brother Mark, picked up girls on the beach and took them out on a boat, where the author claims to have threatened them with violence and told them to strip off their bathing suits. The same person describes himself and Epstein in bed porking some girls while Epstein is shoveling penicillin down his throat. He further describes going out with Epstein and two very young girls. In this section, there's a partially redacted story headed up The Rabbi's Daughter, where the author describes bringing a girl to Epstein's mother's house and making her take her top off so we could touch her boobs. Many of the stories about Jeffrey's youth in Brooklyn have strong references to sexual exploitation, some possibly involving minors, with many glorifying Epstein's skills of manipulation. And in reading this, you really have to wonder if these are the fun stories that these people tell of growing up with Jeffrey Epstein, what are the stories that they chose to keep quiet about? In the first of two sections titled Girlfriends, we start out with a letter from a friend who describes how Epstein participated in peace marches in the 70s because they were the easiest places to get laid. There are intimate pictures of Epstein with women whose faces are redacted, a photo of Epstein with a woman labeled with the quote, "We think he works for the CIA." There's one picture with Ghislaine where she appears to be speaking with a woman whose image is redacted, and the caption, "He promised you what?" There are multiple photos of Epstein in bathtubs with his genitals redacted, and there is this one of Jeffrey in bed wearing Speedos, which was not redacted by the government, but which I redacted as no one needs to see that. The girlfriend section wraps up with Jeffrey and Ghislaine's recreation of the Nirvana Nevermind album cover, and then we move on to the section titled Children. The children section kicks off with the story I mentioned earlier, Uncle F Makes Potty. Then there's a child's drawing of what's possibly a wedding with a bunch of crying children in the background and a little song written over the drawing which contains the line, "Where is the groom? He's in the lady's room." Was this child aware of what a creep Epstein was? I don't know. A lot of the writing is difficult to read. It does also look like there's possibly the figure of a child drawn in the belly of the possible bride. There are a few other things in this section, photos of what are possibly the children of friends or relatives playing the piano and things like that. And then we move on to the friends section, which is the most disturbing part of the book. The friends section kicks off with a photo of what looks like Epstein and another man. Epstein has a stocking over his head, and the friend is wearing a balaclava. The text underneath reads in part, "Jeffrey unveiled his plan. To some it may have seemed a get-rich-quick scheme, but to me it was pure genius. Rob and kill was the name of the plan. The first victim to be attacked and brutally plundered, would she want more than that, on the boardwalk in Venice Beach. Broad daylight. The dastardly thieves were never caught." If we keep scrolling, there's a note from Leon Black, the co-founder of Apollo Global Management, who describes Epstein in his contribution as a Vanity Fair poster child, shortened to VFPC. He mentions Epstein's unique tax strategy and recasts him as the hero in Hemingway's Old Man and the Sea, except instead of catching fish, this old man is catching women, blonde, red, or brunette, spread out geographically. I don't really get the impression that Black has actually read the book. A few pages later, there's a letter referring to Epstein as Degenerate 1, and the letter is signed Degenerate 2, aka, and then a redacted name. After that, we have the famous letter from Bill Clinton praising Epstein's childlike curiosity. Luckily, not his curiosity about children, which is what we're most worried about. After that comes a letter from Alan Dershowitz, the longtime Harvard professor and lawyer for celebrities like Epstein, Trump, and O.J. Simpson, who recently lobbied for Ghislaine Maxwell to be granted immunity in exchange for testifying in front of a congressional committee. In the letter, Dershowitz jokes about how he had talked Vanity Fair into changing the focus of an issue from you to Bill Clinton. The next page, then, is a mocked up cover of Vanity Fair magazine, renamed as Vanity Unfair, with headlines saying that Epstein might have been Jack the Ripper, that he financed the terrorist group Al Qaeda, along with stories about Jeffrey Epstein's bloody summer and Jeffrey Epstein's redacted word rampage. Bill Elkus, the founder of the venture capital firm Clearstone, is in there too. In his note, he wrote about a time in 1988 when Epstein visited him in Fairfield, Iowa. He wrote, "It's no secret that Jeffrey appreciates beautiful women, but not many people know that he can create them out of thin air." He then recounts how Jeffrey managed to find a tall, beautiful blonde who returned to New York with Epstein the next day. He writes, "I'll admit to wondering at the time whether Jeffrey somehow arranged the whole episode through some long-distance escort service. He has since told the press that the event had occurred long before any articles came out about Epstein, good or bad." Pretty much every one of the letters contains either an inappropriate story or inappropriate insinuations. Mentions of inspecting the royal schoolgirls' dorms and an old man groping a woman who he mistakenly believed was a call girl that had been gifted to him are mentioned in this letter from a man named Nick. Lord Mandelson, the recently sacked British ambassador to the United States, who was nicknamed the Prince of Darkness in the UK, took up 9 entire pages of the Epstein book, wrapping up his contribution with the statement that Epstein remains his best pal. Now, Mandelson's nickname, the Prince of Darkness, is unrelated to this scandal. It's just a fairly standard John Milton reference, where in the poem Paradise Lost, Milton used the term to show Satan as the embodiment of evil, but it's also used for Peter Mandelson, who Milton wouldn't have known about when writing the poem. Lord Mandelson of Darkness came under pressure over his relationship with Jeffrey Epstein when the birthday book was released, and the scandal snowballed when Bloomberg published a trove of emails between Mandelson and Epstein in which Mandelson expressed support for his friend and offered to discuss his 2008 Florida case with his political contacts. Mandelson's story about regretting having ever met Epstein and minimizing their closeness doesn't really align with referring to him as his best pal in this long note. You don't really write that in the birthday book of someone you aren't all that close to. Former US Senator George Mitchell, who played a critical role in Northern Ireland's peace process, described his friendship with Epstein as a blessing in the book. Mitchell was accused of wrongdoing by Virginia Giuffre a few years ago. Nathan Myhrvold, the former chief technology officer of Microsoft, wrote in his letter that he was ill prepared to comment on Epstein's lifestyle in any detail, which is probably a wise thing to say. But then he submitted pictures from a recent trip to Africa that showed zebras and lions having sex, along with images of aroused wild animals. It might say something when sending images of zoo porn as a birthday greeting is the most appropriate thing you can think of sending to one of your friends. It might imply that your friend is a bit of a wrong-un. Then we have this image, possibly the most disturbing image in the book, as it really tells you how aware some of Epstein's friends were of his behavior. It's very wise of the artist to have left their masterpiece unsigned. It depicts Epstein in 1983, possibly as a school teacher or just some sort of playground pedo, offering a lollipop to a group of girls, one of whom is holding a bunch of balloons. It's the type of image used to warn children not to take candy from strangers. The next image shows Epstein 20 years later with his jet and island mansion, possibly naked, being massaged by 4 bikini-clad young women, one with a heart tattoo with Epstein's initials inset. At the bottom it says, "What a great country." Now, a few commentators have suggested that this depicts the three children 20 years later. But let's be serious. They would have been around 10 years old in the first drawing, then making them at least 30 by the second drawing, which is way too old for Jeff. The artist here isn't depicting the same people, other than Jeffrey, who's gone from trying to lure children into his van with a lollipop while dressed in rags to basically the same thing, but with a private jet. He's just drawn the kids so that we know it's Epstein, but his message is simply that Epstein now has a private jet and an island, and of course the patriotic message, what a great country. Where's Donald Trump in all of this, I hear you asking? Well, he turns up on the next page now that we're desensitized. Here we see Epstein holding a large novelty check made out to him for $22,500, and the signature on the check bears the name DJ Trump. The caption underneath says, Jeffrey showing early talents with money plus women. Sells, fully depreciated, name redacted, to Donald Trump. According to the BBC, the man in the photo next to Epstein is Joel Pashkow, a member of Trump's Mar-a-Lago club in Florida, and we don't know who the other two people are. The New York Times reports that the page was made by Pashkow and the photo was taken at Mar-a-Lago. They say that it relates to a woman who dated both men in the 1990s. This picture has, of course, drawn a lot of press, as it refers to someone buying a woman from Epstein, a man who's been accused of trafficking. When we get to the third volume of the Epstein birthday book, we start out with the series of limericks attributed to Stuart Piver, which I mentioned earlier, and then the doodle that Trump denies drawing of a possibly immature girl. Trump's doodle doesn't really stand out in a book filled with creepy innuendos and inappropriate drawings. It's really mostly notable because it was likely created by the current US president, who maintained a decades-long friendship with both Epstein and Maxwell, who now appears to be trying to sweep the entire scandal under the rug. There's no real need for me to read the whole thing out, as I'm sure everyone has heard it already, but it's written as a sort of a strange play in which Trump and Epstein speak back and forth in a cryptic manner about there being more to life than having everything. Donald says, "We have certain things in common, Jeffrey." Jeffrey agrees. Trump says, "Enigmas never age," and wraps up saying, "May every day be another wonderful secret." And I'll allow you to interpret that however you wish. But I think that whether you're on the right or the left, we can all agree that had Trump not made it in politics, he definitely wouldn't have made it as a playwright. The book was, of course, put together in 2003, a few years before any charges had been pressed against Epstein and before Trump had achieved any real success as a reality TV star. At the time, both men were New Yorkers with residences in Palm Beach who regularly showed up in newspaper gossip columns. Trump had only gone bankrupt 4 times by that point and wouldn't go bankrupt again for another year. He wasn't involved in politics at this time either, other than to make donations to various candidates on both the right and left. Next up are, of course, the Titrints, which were specially commissioned by the late economist Henry Rosovsky, who served as Dean of the Faculty of Arts and Sciences at Harvard University, and occasionally as its acting president. A short handwritten note reads, "For the man who has almost everything, but never enough of these." And then on the next 2 pages are the tit prints. Now, a lot of the lazy news coverage is reporting that these are prints of a woman's breasts, but we actually have no way of knowing if this is true or not. Rozovsky passed away almost 3 years ago and can't defend himself. If you Google him, you'll see that he was not a slim man, and he may well have just gone out to an art supply store in Cambridge, picked up some paint, and made his own tit prints, writing to Epstein, "For the man who has almost everything, but never enough of these." For all we know, Rozovsky may have just been another one of Epstein's victims. The tit prints are disturbing one way or another, just in very different ways. Les Wexner, a few pages later, doodled an image of what appears to be a woman's chest, but once again, we don't know. It might be another representation of Rosovsky's chest. This may have been a bit of an inside joke between Epstein and his friends. Who knows? Wexner was one of Epstein's clients and has previously denied having any knowledge of Epstein's crimes prior to the federal investigations, which came a few years after this book. The doodle can only be described as a poor effort from Wexner, who paid huge sums of money to Epstein for money management services and tax advice, but then he can't even go to the effort of making his own tit print like Rosovsky did. The guy was running Victoria's Secret at the time, and this was the best that he could do. After that, we have the science section. Jeffrey Epstein was known to have spent time with a number of important scientists, as well as that Eric Weinstein guy who won't stop talking about it. Going through the science section, I didn't find any hugely inappropriate content. There was plenty of flattery, possibly because Epstein was a big donor, but the science section is maybe the tamest section in the whole book. After that, we have the girl-friend section, which is just really strange, as Ghislaine Maxwell, who seems to have been a girlfriend of Epstein, was collecting all of these notes from other girlfriends, which just had to be a bit weird. There are lots of redacted photos in this section, this one being a good example, where the author includes a photo and writes, "Can't get a second of privacy with you and a camera around, ha ha." Some of the entries are quite weird. One contributor writes, "I want to cut you into bird head pieces and chew them between my molars until I suck all the blood and juice out of you. No stew, just raw." In this section, there are pages of redacted bikini photos and possibly nudes. The contributions from assistants were quite similar, with lots of bikini shots and hints at sexual relationships. They don't really seem like employer-employee messages. In the business section, one standout message is from a guy named Elliot Wolk, who appears to have worked with Epstein at Bear Stearns. He writes, "I was running an account for Bob Maxwell, Ghislaine Maxwell's father. You always had the ability to know everyone and be charming. Was that when you first discovered the Maxwell teenage daughter?" Once again, really strange, and stranger when you realize that Ghislaine collected these messages and put them together in a book. A BBC article points out that there are ongoing questions about the timeline of when Epstein and Maxwell's relationship first began, and the birthday book adds just another layer of doubt to the story that they first met in 1991. The final chapter of the book is titled The Next 50 Years, and it's just 2 pages long. It wraps up with a photo of Epstein on a hammock on what appears to be his private island. Maxwell signs off with, "Know when you're winning, the next 50 years will be even more wonderful." That didn't turn out to be true. Jeffrey Epstein died under suspicious circumstances in a prison 16 years later, and Ghislaine Maxwell is today serving a 20-year sentence for conspiring to traffic minors. All in all, around 150 people contributed to the birthday book, from well-known public figures to lesser-known family members and friends. Each of the contributors has denied any wrongdoing in connection with Epstein, and many have expressed regret that they knew him at all. The White House has denied that Trump created the image that bears his name and signature. The book is not the proof that many were hoping it would be, but one fairly obvious takeaway is that it doesn't appear that Epstein made much of an effort to hide his terrible behavior. I don't see the release of this book leading to any prosecutions, as all of the messages were written using innuendo with cryptic references rather than outright admissions of criminality. Reading the book, you get the distinct impression that his friends knew exactly what he was up to, but there's no smoking gun. A number of the contributors have already died, but the book shows us a wealthy clique who were aware of and possibly amused by Epstein's interest in very young women. They were also aware of his generally awful behavior. Reading the entries, I'm reminded of Father Mapple's sermon in Moby Dick, when he tells the story of Jonah and the whale. In the sermon, the captain who ferries Jonah is described by Father Mapple as a man whose discernment detects crime in any, but whose cupidity exposes it only in the penniless. Melville continues, sin that pays its way can travel freely and without a passport, whereas virtue, if a pauper, is stopped at all frontiers. Epstein's fortune opened doors for him and silenced any doubts. The captain in Melville's tale tests Jonah's purse before judging his character. In the same way, Epstein's associates seemed more interested in the benefits of his company than the consequences of his actions. The book is filled with tributes that reflect admiration, indulgence, and a willingness to overlook or even joke about behavior that amongst most people would have raised real alarms. There's a misconception among certain people that the Epstein case is just a tabloid scandal, salacious, irrelevant, and disconnected from the concerns of everyday people. That's definitely what's put forth by people who don't like that someone they admire is included. But the reason this scandal won't go away and why people across the political spectrum continue to demand answers is because at its core lies something far more serious than just gossip: the two-tiered system of justice in America and the legal immunity that we seem to afford the nation's elites. Crimes are committed at every level of society. The issue isn't that elites commit more crimes, it's that they're often shielded from consequences when they do. If someone steals a loaf of bread to feed themselves, they'll be prosecuted. But billion-dollar crypto scams involving celebrities or political insiders are routinely ignored by the legal system. And because those with wealth and influence have greater reach, the harm that they cause can ripple far beyond their immediate circles, affecting everyone. There's always been a strange gap in Epstein's story, which I covered in my earlier video, which I think was called Follow the Money. This gap is very noticeable in the birthday book too. His friends bring up his immense wealth over and over again, but there's no explanation or discussion of where it came from or how it appeared so suddenly. Epstein's resume is quite thin for someone of his wealth and influence. He had a brief stint at Bear Stearns, leaving under unclear circumstances, and never held a formal role at any other financial institution. He wasn't a hedge fund manager, he wasn't a tax expert, and he wasn't a lawyer. And yet, he was supposed to be providing investment and tax advice to some of the wealthiest people in the world who could have hired the best advisors for much lower fees than they appear to have been paying Epstein. He, out of nowhere, accumulated hundreds of millions of dollars, owned multiple properties in New York, Florida, New Mexico, Paris, and the Virgin Islands. The internet is filled with theories of how he made this money. Some claim that he was a pimp, but pimping just isn't that profitable. It's not going to make you a billion. Others say that he was a blackmailer, but I would think that blackmailing billionaires and presidents would be a good way to get yourself killed. It also doesn't make sense that people would be friends with their blackmailer and write birthday greetings in a book that further incriminate themselves. Others claim that he was an intelligence asset, possibly a foreign spy running honeypots for foreign governments, or maybe that he even worked for the CIA. This doesn't hold up either, as why would an intelligence agency give him so much money? If Epstein was working for a government, he was the most overcompensated spy in history. There are other theories that he was an arms dealer, but if that was true, the government would know about it, and there'd be no good reason to keep that a secret. I don't believe that he had dirt on all of his elite friends, or at least I don't believe that he was using the dirt he had as leverage, as if that was true, these people wouldn't so obviously enjoy hanging out with him. If he filmed people engaging in illegal activities with children, he would be just as incriminated as they were. After all, he arranged the meetings and hid the cameras. It's pretty obvious that the US government has the tools to trace all of his money. Banks are required to report all transfers above $10,000, and the IRS can track wire transfers. The SEC can also subpoena trading records, and the Department of Justice can compel testimony. If they wanted to know who paid Epstein and why, they could easily find out. But they say that they haven't found anything. And that silence is quite telling. Now, some of this could be partially blamed on incompetence within these agencies. Some of the top law enforcement agencies are run by podcasters, drunks who wear novelty socks, and children's book authors with no prior law enforcement expertise. But we must remember that before being given these roles, these people all talked about how they were going to release the files, likely with the idea that doing so would expose their political rivals. After taking office, they suddenly got very quiet. There are claims that Epstein was unusually smart, but one thing that amused me in his address book was that he seemed to have had different email addresses for each of his different homes. This was in 2003. Email wasn't exactly a new technology then. People understood how it worked. I mean, the BlackBerry existed. How exactly did Epstein think email worked? He's meeting up with Nobel Prize-winning scientists, but somehow thinks that the postman brings his emails to a house and types them out for him. His address book is quite long, but on the same page that he keeps record of the email addresses of his various homes, he also has notes about the Israeli Prime Minister's Secret Service personnel, the phone number of a scout for young females, and the contact details of David Copperfield, in brackets, magician, so as it won't be mixed up with David Copperfield, Dickensian character, I suppose. I guess stage magicians are just children's party entertainers who got a bit too successful. When we look at the information released by Bloomberg about Epstein's emails, they show the methodical and callous approach that he took to recruiting teenage girls. His usually female contacts, they report, sent him steady streams of photographs and descriptions of women, like this one. Nice personality, student, a little curvy, Russian, 19. Epstein would then reply with a brief yes or no. In some cases, he was more expansive, fat and Asian, sorry, he wrote in one email. The Epstein birthday book, his non-prosecution agreement, his last will and testament, along with his address book, are now part of the public record. The people who've been minimizing the nature of their friendships with him are less credible than ever before. I'm not sure that the government agencies will ever release the results of their investigations into Epstein, as the system that protected him still exists. In my opinion, the public deserves answers not just about Epstein, but about the system that made him possible. If you found this video interesting, you should watch my video on the Great Mortgage Divide next. Don't forget to check out our sponsor, Surfshark, using the link in the description. Talk to you in the next video. Bye.